We're really delighted to speak to Jamie Dimon. Thank you so much for taking the time whilst you're in London to speak to us. So the Fed. Today we're expecting 50 basis points hikes. What happens to inflation here? Is this your biggest concern?
So Francine, happy to be here. And to give it a little perspective, we have, and this is contradictory I'm about to say, but both are true, very strong U.S. economy.
Yeah.
Consumers in great shape, lots of money, spending the money, jobs are plentiful, wages are going up, though everything's distorted by inflation and all that, but those are good news, and businesses are in very good shape, and the Fed is going to have to raise rates and reverse QE. And they're going to, if they can, they're going to try to slow down the economy enough so that 8% starts to come down over time. And I wish them the best.
Yeah.
We're a little late, but remember 2 years ago we had 15% unemployment and no vaccine. So I think people should take a deep breath, give them a chance, and I think they got to move. I think the sooner they move, the better. So yeah, they're going to be raising rates.
Deep breath, but can they engineer a soft landing, or is there a worry of recession in the US?
Of course, but none of us will ever know, right? But if I had to, I'm not a betting man. The odds are the following: something like, yes, they can engineer a soft landing, 1/3% chance. Probably 1/3% chance they can engineer a mild recession. Think of, we've had mild Fed-induced recessions before, where inflation goes up 1.5% or 2%, everything slows down, inflation's coming down, and it's 6 or 9 months. And then there's a chance it's going to be much harder than that. And then in the face of all of that, you have Ukraine, which is a huge global issue. And
do you fear the Fed, and do you fear a policy mistake from the Fed, and what that does to consumers?
I'm not afraid of the Fed. I'll change the subject a little bit. I think America needs very good domestic policy to improve the growth of the economy, which makes the Fed job easier. And that is about regulations and rules and policies and approving projects and things like that. So you have, increase the supply side as opposed to, do some of the demand side. So the Fed's job would be easier if we had very rational, thoughtful economic policy.
What could go wrong? I mean, you talk about, a strong U.S. consumer, strong business. You talked also about storm clouds. What are those storm clouds, and what's worst case scenario right now?
Yeah, I hate the word unprecedented, but there's kind of fiscal and monetary induced unbelievable growth in the U.S., which was true around the world, though it's obviously slowing down in Europe. That's abnormal. We've never really quite had that before. We've never had QT before. So, you look at QE, that's one of the greatest experiments ever done. They're going to be writing books for 50 years on it, and we're going to have to reverse it. And that's a huge change in the flow of funds over time around bonds and rates and stuff like that. My own view is that rates will still have to go up from here. And then you've got Ukraine, which I think is a potential. When you look at Ukraine, obviously the wishful thinking is we have a Fed-induced slowdown works, the world is fine, Ukraine resolves, but there's a chance that this goes on for years, and you completely rattle global energy markets, wheat markets, commodity markets, and and we need, as the Western world needs to be prepared for that, and needs to take every action today to be prepared that can get really bad tomorrow. And when it gets really bad tomorrow, you don't have time.
So how do you handle that? What's your plan B if it does go all pear-shaped? I
like the fact that it will deal with it. That's life.
But how?
I like in my view, the most important thing is American growth, and that America, I call it this Marshall Plan for energy, that we do everything we can, and this doesn't violate climate change, it doesn't change anything about long-term objectives, but that we do everything we can to get oil and gas into the hands of Europeans so they don't freeze in the winter. And again, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you have a couple of problems out there. The national energy stuff the global energy is precarious, and if oil goes to 185, that's a huge problem for people. And we should do everything we can today. We need to pump more oil and gas. We need to
Why are they
pipelines.
not, Jamie? If you look at the U.S. frackers, they could drill more.
We get confused about policy, and that somehow doing that is bad for the climate. It's not. We need, if you want transition, you need gas to replace coal. And we should approve all the green stuff, too. Even the green stuff takes 5 years to 10 years to approve in the United States. America needs to get its act together, and they should have a war room. They should get everyone involved, get all the people, and say, what do we need to do in a consistent, coherent way? We need to get more gas to LNG terminals. Well, you can't do that without a gas pipeline. And so we're just not rational anymore. We have misconceived notions about how we're going to get things done. And so And they're trying.
What's the role of Europe in this? Could Europe see a recession because of the energy prices?
Absolutely. Our economists would say that Europe has slowed down to 2% or something. But the problem with right now, and the economists would agree with me, we're looking at a static analysis, that if things stay the way they are. But you and I know for certain things don't stay the way they are. And my view is there's a very high chance that oil will go higher. It only takes 1 million to 2 million barrels off the market a day that can drive prices up $30 or $40. And so we should prepare for that today. And but I like the fact, I think it's great that the Western world has gotten together.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that Putin would get Sweden, Finland, Germany, Switzerland, all of us to, but that working together part, we need to make permanent for global security.
Jamie, first of all, just going back to the European economy, how quickly could we see a recession and how deep could it be?
I don't know. I mean, I hate to guess the future. No one really knows the future. I've never seen anyone really guess it well. But again, if Ukraine gets worse, I would assume that Europe's going to go into recession. It may take a couple of quarters, but I would assume that.
Are sanctions working? So are the sanctions trying to deter Russia from continuing the war in Ukraine, or is it just to try and put the Russian economy on their knees?
Yeah, well, sanctions is not the same as having tanks and airplanes, okay? But they are working to the extent that, the Russian GDP is going to drop by 10 or 15% with the current sanctions. And remember, there's sanctions, there's also the export controls and stuff like that. And the next round, if Europe really stops oil, and you can really stop oil being delivered, Russia, it can get another 10% down. So it's a tool in the toolkit. It's not definitive. What's definitive is tanks. So we're not. Don't confuse the two. But one is a pretty powerful. The sanctions are a pretty powerful tool.
But if you expect this to last for, I think you said years.
I don't expect it. I said we should be prepared for it too. I don't know what's going to happen.
But how do you see this ending? And actually, if you're a president of the U.S., if you're a president of the Commission, if you're the Fed right now, you need to game theory, and it could go either way. It's like a three-way system. Mm-hmm. So what do you do?
I would plan for all three of them. I think it's a mistake to guess at which one it'll be. It should be all three of them. And I think, basically the Cold War is back. I think the whole world learned something that we always knew, that national security is always the most important thing, but it kind of recedes in the background. We're all doing well. But now it's the most important thing. It should be the most important thing for the rest of our lives. So maybe we all learned that is a permanent state of affairs. The Cold War is back. The allies have to coalesce, and not just for military purposes, but for global, economic, strategic investment purposes, so that we've got a safe world. If we don't do that, you see Ukraine, you can see all around the world. You will see forms of chaos.
So the impact on the economy, would you go around a trading floor and tell the young kids that have never dealt with inflation that actually interest rates could be up at 5% shortly?
Of course. Of course, that's, things change. And, I think you can easily see 5% bonds. Now, bonds have already, 10-year bonds have already reacted dramatically, and hopefully it won't go a lot. But I don't think it's a disaster. I don't think a slowdown is a disaster. I don't think when you say a mini recession, I feel for the people who get hurt in that. But it's not a disaster for the world economy. I think the potential outcomes of Ukraine are. And you got to just separate the two. And just remember, when you talk about war, we didn't know how bad Vietnam was going to get. We didn't know how long Afghanistan was going to last. The Russians didn't know how long Afghanistan was going to last. You can go war after war after war. They were not predictable. You didn't know that World War I was going to be like that. You didn't know that World War II was going to start in September of 1939. So I think predicting the outcome of this war, you got to be very careful.
But so why are markets so relaxed?
That's markets. That can change just like that.
Do you think it will, or are we expecting a big correction?
I'm not guessing. I don't know. Again, Francine, my job in life is I will serve our clients through thick or thin and our country and stuff like that. And of course, we're always, as a rule of thumb, we're always prepared for bad outcomes, not because we're predicting them, because I need to say to the shareholder, the American public, my regulators, the UK, that JPMorgan will be safe and sound and help your country and your people if things get bad. And that is our job. Now we're dealing with a whole bunch of different things, and we're prepared. We have extraordinary capability and capital, but earnings power. And
where's China in this right now?
Look, my view is that China can't possibly like this. And they're playing, if you look at them, they're playing a very neutral role. They're not trying to anger the United States. They know that the American Congress may very well, the Congress, not just the president, can come in and put these secondary sanctions. They do $3.5 trillion of trade with the West. Imports and exports. They do $150 billion with Russia. Okay, one number is critically important. Sanctions against them may be bad for the Western world. It'll be even worse for them. And so they don't need that. They want to grow their country. They want to expand. You know, maybe they don't like the West so much. They like this. I just don't believe that's true. Okay. I think that they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They had this so-called ally who's putting them in a difficult place.
Can we still rely on China, given the COVID zero policy, and actually the shocks that's coming just from that policy continuing?
I think China has done, you got to put China in perspective. It's done a very good job developing itself over 30 or 40 years. It doesn't have all the strengths of the Western world. Okay, it doesn't have our food, our water, our energy, our innovation, our rule of law. The competition of ideas. Autocracy has huge negatives. They don't have enough food, war, and energy. Their neighbors are very complex. Russia, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Philippines, Japan, Korea. It's hard for them to be expansionary. They don't have a lot of things we have. So, yes, I think we should be worried about them, and I think the West should negotiate, how we're going to deal with trade, unfair competition, IP, but sit down with them.
Yeah.
Work it through with them. We don't need to be afraid of them. We should be afraid of is our own incompetence, not dealing with the Chinese. As long as we stay together. If the Western world doesn't stay together, they'll cherry pick every nation, and then you'll end up with what you had with Germany and Nord Stream 2. That will be a problem.
Jim, are you committed to China? So if we're seeing a split, and we're seeing the HSBC and investor activism, could you see big banks actually being split in two because of this East-West tension?
No. I think, again, you got to look. I mean, business you run for 30 or 40 years. So we've made a big investment in China, greater China, including Hong Kong, et cetera. Will be 30 or 40% of the global market one day. They will be a fully developed nation in 20 or 30 years. Their politics will change. Is there a chance of a very bad outcome? That the world completely separates? There's a chance. That will be bad for JPMorgan, but we'll survive. But I think there's a much bigger chance that the blocs will negotiate strategic, economic, a bunch of other arrangements. Like I said, it's 3.5 billion trade.
But this over what timeline?
What will change?
Like 5,
what
10
will
years?
change?
Yeah.
It'll take time. What will change is anything to do with national security. Anything. So think of AI, 5G. Penicillin, rare earths, semiconductors, those supply chains will be brought back, as Janet Yellen said today, will be friendly sourced. It doesn't have to be in the States. It's got to be in an ally. So I think all nations are going to do that. China already does that. Yeah. So this is a unilateral thing, and I think the rest of the trade will be fine, or fundamentally fine. And that may take time. But that will happen over time, and it's kind of a little surprising to me how much the Western world relied on China, not for trade and for sneakers and for shirts and stuff, but for rare earths.
But they have them. We don't.
No, we do. That's the whole thing. America's got tons of rare earths. It just will cost a lot more money to take it out and smelt it, and they're environmentalists and all that. That's why I'm saying national security. Yeah. If I was in the White House, the only thing I'd be doing now is national security, and I'd be making decisions every day about how we create more secure energy, rare earths, commodities, wheat, all the things that the world's going to need, not against China, but to protect the Western world. And so all these things could be done. America's not used to having an industrial policy. To do that successfully, you're going to have some form of industrial policy where you're doing some kind of subsidies. It should, but be clear, I don't want to subsidize a company.
Right.
I just think some of these things need to be brought back to the United States.
This will probably be inflationary, right? Is crypto a hedge against inflation?
No.
Right now?
No. I think the higher rates go, the more cost to hold an asset doesn't produce anything. So, but I think national security is number one. I would not do something because of inflation, because of national security. They are completely different. And people shouldn't get confused the two. And this is why America has to take leadership on that. This is a matter of national security. If everything turns out fine in Ukraine, we'll all take a deep breath and say, we overreacted. I'd rather that than we all take a deep breath and say, my God, we were not prepared. And
when it comes to Roe v. Wade, we've been talking about nothing else for the last 2 days. What does it mean for JPMorgan and your employees?
I'm not going to get involved in that. I think it's a mistake. These things are very complicated, and when people pass laws everywhere, there's actually 100 things in the law.
This is costs, right?
No, it's not. It's not.
Insurance?
There are 100 things in all these laws. 100. And so when people say support this, support that, all you're doing is being sucked into support something you probably shouldn't. Yeah. I've looked at all the voting laws, I've looked at all these laws, and you look at them, I agree with some of the things they say, I don't agree with some of the things they say. New York does a better job than Georgia. So I'm not going to get sucked into saying I support your law.
But instead of support, I mean, do you see actually for such a big bank in the U.S. having to shift because of policies?
Whatever it is, we'll deal with it. I don't sit here in fear of that. Whatever it is, we'll deal with it. And we'll take care of our people like we've always said we would.